Good morning. It's good to be here with you today. We're on the last of a series having to do with God's second book, nature. Some of you know that I have a particular fondness for that second book. And when I'm able to be out and about doing something other than things related to this church family and my home, it's in God's second book that I find myself. And it was much appreciated by me when you graciously allowed me to complete a trip not so long ago in August that had been scheduled well in advance before I came here to the Galapagos Islands. I'd wanted to go there for a number of reasons, and today you're going to discover some of those reasons. And then I want to share with you some pictures. Now, I know there's a risk of travel logs. This isn't a travel log. They get pretty boring, but I hope that today you see some of the nature, God's second book, that you would not otherwise see. Many of you, either because of health reasons or other reasons, financial, otherwise, are not able to travel a great deal. There is God's second book out your back door, believe it or not, even if you live in town. But we're going to take a journey today, and I trust that the Lord will bless our time together. According to their kind, and I'm going to ask that the lights be mostly dimmed in here, all of the spots. I want the screen to be as bright today as possible, and I hope you'll be okay, even more if you can. Just pretty much shut things down. That's good. Because I've discovered the projector isn't as sharp and as bright as I wished, but I think you'll be able to see these. Just ask the animals, and they will what? Teach you. And the birds of the sky, and they will tell you. Speak to the earth, and it will instruct you. Let the fish in the sea speak to you. For the life of every living thing. How many lives? The life of every living thing is in his hand, and the breath of every human being. Praise the Lord from the earth, you creatures of the ocean depths, fire and hail, snow and clouds, wind and weather that obey him, mountains and all hills, fruit trees and all cedars, wild animals and all livestock, small scurrying animals and birds, kings of the earth and all people, rulers and judges of the earth, young men and young women, old men and children, let them all, what? Praise the Lord. For his name is very great. His glory towers over the earth and heaven. And ever since he created this place we live in, since he filled it with creatures below us, around us, above us, he has continued to sustain it. Albeit there have been problems. We haven't been very good stewards, and the effects of sin can be found everywhere. Last August, when I ventured out on a trip, I went to some islands that lie 600 to 700 miles to the west of Ecuador, the Galapagos Islands. It's hard to see probably for you, but the red lines moving from island to island there represent the journey that we took over 2.5 weeks. It was up before dawn, 4:30 in the morning. It was to bed late. It was a strenuous journey, but it was an exciting one. But I wasn't the first to take it by any means. The most famous of those voyagers was a gentleman named Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin traveled to the Galapagos, and it was there that he began to formulate his views as to how the creatures that he saw came to be. He was the naturalist in a scientific expedition aboard the Beagle, the name of the sailing ship. And he and those other members of the expedition, over 5 years' time, circumnavigated the globe. He kept journals. He collected specimens. He began to draw his conclusions. And the conclusions he drew have had significant impact on the scientific world since. They're not biblically based conclusions for the most part. In fact, in his day, people viewed the earth and the creatures in it quite differently than they do today. Ultimately, he wrote a book. It wasn't just about the Galapagos. He titled it On the Origin of Species, and it was published in 1859. Few scientists today give much thought to Scripture, and few theologians believe the early chapters of Genesis are anything more than a myth. Did you know that? It is becoming prevalent in the religious world to buy into Darwin's theories today. But Adventists, for you and I, and for those of you who are guests, you can know that we as Adventists believe the creation story just as it's presented in Genesis 1. You see, it's critical to believe it because it's a central theme of Scripture. God created. It's critical to our understanding of the Sabbath and its meaning. In fact, I would suggest it's critical to our understanding of the very plan of salvation. The creation story speaks of our relationship to God, to the universe, and to those around us. In Darwin's book and over a subsequent period of years, a number of terms have come to be commonly heard and understood in the scientific world. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on those today, but you'll hear terms like evolutionary biology, common descent, natural selection. And along with natural selection is the notion of survival of the fittest. Have you heard that? The transmutation of species. What does the Bible say? Then God said, "Let the waters abound with an abundance of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth, across the face of the firmament of the heavens." So God created great sea creatures and every living thing that moves, with which the waters abounded, according to their kind and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw what? That it was good. Then God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature according to its kind. Cattle and creeping thing and beast of the earth, each according to its kind. And it was so. And God made the beast of the earth according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. The Hebrew word mean appears in that Genesis account. It is translated as kind. The meaning is clear. The fish and the fowl and the beasts, anything created as kind, did not evolve from some lower species. Each was fully formed, capable to surviving and reproducing within its kind. Leviticus has to do with some health laws, and it's interesting that this is just one verse of several in that chapter. If we were to read it all, we'd be here quite a while. But here it talks about the ostrich and the short-eared owl and the seagull and the hawk after its kind and the little owl, the fisher owl and the screech owl. And, well, the fact of the matter is that the biblical account sometimes is talking about individuals within a group. For example, individual types of owls or individual types of hawks or individual types of fishes. But at other times, it uses more what we would call generic categories. But the focus is always on kind. And in chapter 7, verse 14, this arrangement of kind is confirmed. It has to do with Noah's experience of the birds after their kind, of animals after their kind, and of every creeping thing of the earth after its kind. 2 of every kind will come to you to keep them alive, God said to Noah. Together with all the various kinds of wild beasts, all the various kinds of domestic animals, all the various kinds of land reptiles, all the various kinds of birds, everything with feathers and wings, of all creatures in which there was the breath of life, a pair of each joined Noah in the ark. Taxonomies, if you're acquainted with that term, taxonomies, which have to do with the naming and classification of animals, began with Adam. And for much of history, we've been classifying and naming creatures. And it's interesting, we rely on primarily their physical characteristics. But with the recent advent of molecular systematics, as it's called, for which DNA sequences are used, there have been numerous surprises. The taxonomy has just been completely turned on its head. Cichlids, monkeys, dolphins, lizards, frogs, bats, sticklebacks, yes, even birds are being discovered to have strong physical similarities, but genetically, it's being discovered they are worlds apart. That confirms the Genesis account. And scientists are puzzling over it. In one area, the birds, it's amazing. For years and years and years, you'd pick up a bird book, And you'd see pictures of hawks and you'd see pictures of falcons. They were grouped together. You know, they look somewhat similar. They behave in similar fashion. Well, recently, genetics has thrown all of that on its ear. And they are finding out that falcons are not genetically related to hawks at all. They go in a different place in the bird book. With birds that aren't at all like them physically, in terms of physical characteristic. Well, for our journey, we climbed on board the Samba. The Samba was an 85-foot boat. There were 21 of us on board, 14 guests and 7 crew. It was rather cramped because all of the 14 guests had one or more carry-on cases of camera gear. That's what we were there for. One of our first sights was related to the prickly pear cactus. These are cactus trees, opuntia. They are upwards of 40 feet tall. The Galapagos Islands are volcanic. And in many places, they remind you of going up out of sisters up over the pass, with lava everywhere. Quite interesting. Those cactus trees make for some pretty imposing scenery. And I'm going to move through some pictures fairly rapidly now, so I'm going to ask that you even turn down the lights slightly more, if possible. There you go. And we're going to take you on a little journey to these islands. And we're going to move through, like I say, move through some of these pictures fairly quickly. Just to give you a flavor of what the islands look like, it was not the best time of year for flowers, that sort of thing. It was a kind of a dry season. But we found some scenic beauty nonetheless, mostly in the form of cacti. There are bluffs, there are cliffs. We hiked to the top of some of them over lava fields. It made for a very interesting experience. And among the creatures we saw were American flamingos. American flamingos, the same species is found in the Florida Keys on occasion. The same species is found on the mainland of Latin America on occasion. This subspecies is there in the Galapagos. And they're a fascinating creature. Didn't want to let us get very close, but you tried. And long lenses paid off. Then we saw another bird. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I thought they were pretty unique in the Galapagos. But this is an American oyster catcher. You can see those on the east coast of the United States. Again, a little bit of an isolated subspecies down there, although a few oyster catchers will actually migrate that far. And they're a fascinating bird as well. This pair was on a lava flow. And right in the midst of the lava flow was a nest. And we chose not to go near the nest because Mom and Dad weren't too happy if we did. And that made it very interesting for us because we were in the islands and we discovered very quickly that in some sense it was like Eden. You could approach animals so closely, for the most part, they had not the least bit of fear of humans. In fact, they had to remind us that the national park rules, and all of the Galapagos Islands are a part of a national park. The national park rules say you can be within up to about 6 feet from the animals and birds, but you shouldn't go closer. We had special dispensation as photographers. We were allowed to get closer, but we were told under no circumstance do you touch them. You can sit or stand in place, and if they come closer to you, that's okay, but don't touch them. And we honored that request. A blue-footed booby related to the gannet, and its feet are every bit as blue as you see there, perhaps even bluer in certain light. Here was a courting pair. The male on the left was doing his best to impress the female. She didn't look too impressed in that particular shot. But somebody was impressed somewhere because they had a chick after its kind. You know, the Genesis account does not say that every species that is present on earth today was here then. What it says is that animals and birds reproduce after their kind. So we don't have mixes between donkeys and cats. We don't have mixes between, well, you get the idea. And so here is a case where the blue-footed booby has, of all things, a blue-footed booby chick, as you might expect. Now this picture is not a great picture, but if you understand that I'm in a rubber boat with 7 other guys, and we're bouncing along, and the wind's blowing, but these boobies, these blue-footed boobies, started circling overhead, 150 of them all around us, and they're diving for fish. And when they dive, they get moving at 60 miles an hour. And we're sitting in the boat hoping that they didn't dive where we were. And we're all trying to take pictures, and some of the guys had 600 millimeter lenses that looked this long, and they'd swing around, and we'd end up pictures of the guy's hat in front of us, you know, because we're all trying to take pictures of these things, and it's a challenge. All the splashes represent birds that have just disappeared underneath the surface. And when they hit the surface, it was a loud pop. And so you can imagine 150 birds roughly around us, all around us, 360 degrees, and they're all diving at different times after fish in that school of fish. It's an impressive sound and an even more impressive sight, and you even forget to push the shutter on your camera because you're watching and you're listening. The brown noddy nests on cliff sides. This brown noddy, beautiful little bird. He's probably about 10 inches long. His young nest on the cliff sides too. Again, we're in a boat and we're moving along the face of the cliff, and this noddy came to feed her young. And it turns out that the young's been around a while because that little juvenile's almost as big as mom. The brown pelican, another bird found in America, in the U.S., along our west coast. You've seen them. This is a related subspecies. And when they get ready to, when you get close, it's interesting what you see. The detail in their face, the features. And they dive too. And what you see there is one of the feet sticking up in the air as it disappears underwater. And sometimes they land in very interesting places. This one chose to land on a whole bunch of marine iguanas. And they didn't seem to mind, and he didn't seem to mind, and I'm not sure what he was doing there. But eventually, they find food and take it home to their young. And the young, their head disappears. And I'm sure they've got quite the feeling because of the look on this adult's face. How would you like to have a young with a bill almost as big as you sticking in your gullet? It has to affect you. Then there's the Elliott storm petrel. Darwin saw these too, and he's trying to make sense of just know that there is generally accepted the belief that petrel, that word, comes from, petrels were originally named in the taxonomy after the Apostle Peter. And why did they name them that? Because they walk on water. For all practical purposes, it appears they walk on water. And when we're in our little rubber boat and we're kneeling down trying to get close to the surface of the water to watch these, and there'd be 15 or 20 of them in a flock, and they all generally move in the same direction at the same time, and they're all with their feet down, and they're all walking on the water. They're eating little plankton and other things they find on the surface of the water. And it's just amazing to watch these little guys. They're not very big. That bird from head to tail is about this long, maybe 6 inches. How can anyone believe these evolved? I look at them and I say, what a remarkable creator. He made these birds with the capability of adjusting to their niche in the environment, finding food and sustenance on the surface of the water, and they're just bouncing around, almost like they're having a wonderful time out there. Then we saw a flightless cormorant, only found in the Galapagos, the only place in the world. Here is one of them returning to the nest site, and it's bringing up some seaweed, and it has to hop from lava rock to lava rock because it can't fly. And it makes its way up into the nest, and then it drops its seaweed for its mate, and she rearranges the seaweed in the nest. Here she is accepting this gift from Dad. And then she moved. And I saw that she had literally a hours old chick. He looked like he was being fairly well cared for. But he did have a face that only a mother could love. And when he grows a bit, and he's a juvenile, and you're up close and personal, he's got a particularly interesting personality. Here's Mom preening herself. Do you see her eye through her feathers? She can spread those wings. She uses those wings underwater to swim, but she can't fly with them. The Galapagos dove, another very small bird, beautiful. You know, when the Lord created some creatures, He pulled out all the stops when it came to color. And she has pinkish red feet and a bright blue eye ring. Can you beat it? Isn't that amazing? how colorful this little dove is. It's the only dove in the Galapagos. None of our mourning doves or Eurasian collared doves. And then the Galapagos finches. Darwin made special notice of these because depending on which book you use, you decide that there are probably 13 to 14 different species of finches in the Galapagos, most of which are found nowhere else in the world. And interestingly enough, they have little differences in beak size and coloration, minor differences, but they tend to be localized. In other words, some species are found on one island only and not another island. And then a different species on another island, but not that island. And now, well, they named them all, and Darwin was a part and parcel of that process. And then they've decided that genetically they're going to have to revisit some of this now that they know more about DNA. I won't attempt to tell you which kind of finch is which here because it doesn't make much difference for your purpose, but obviously this guy's a little different than the preceding one. The Galapagos fur seal. Interesting place. Where are fur seals normally found? In the Arctic. And this is the only fur seal found anywhere in the tropical zone. It's unique to the Galapagos. You notice the ear flaps? We call them ear flaps. They're related to sea lions. Then we decided to look at this guy that was sleeping. He did open his eyes for me finally. Then he promptly went back to snoozing. But we were able to get a fairly good close-up. Interesting. He looks so calm, doesn't he? The Galapagos hawk. Only one species found in those islands. And Darwin was saying, well, what is it doing here? And it's different than any other hawk. And it looks a lot like our red-tailed hawks. But it's different. We watched a Galapagos hawk waiting intently for the placenta from a newborn sea lion baby. And we didn't actually watch the birth, but we arrived there just moments after. And this hawk was sitting there waiting and wanted in the worst way and would kind of walk down toward it, and then mom sea lion would look at him and he'd back up. He waited long enough that eventually he got what he wanted. There are mockingbirds there too, more than one species, and they're related to our mockingbirds. And then the Galapagos penguin. Now, fur seals tend to be up toward the Arctic, but there are fur seals in the Galapagos at the equator. Penguins tend to be in the Antarctic, but there's one species found in the Galapagos only, at the equator. What that tells me is, among other things, it tells me that the Lord gave creatures a capacity, a wonderful capacity to adapt to the environment. You see, sin has affected our environment. Man has affected our environment. And these birds and animals are able to adapt. He's a cute little guy. He probably stands 12 to 14 inches tall, I would think. They get in the water. Those colors in the water, by the way, are various natural substances floating on the surface. But They get in the water and they're very graceful, having a conversation. And then the Galapagos sea lion looks a lot like our sea lions. Gets itches just like we do. These little pups, they're not really upset with each other. They're just having a good time. And one of our number sat down and waited, and 3 little pups came up to him so close that he couldn't focus his camera lens. And one of them looked up in his face as if to say, "Hi, who are you?" I imagine that's what heaven will be like one day. Here's a young pup in a very typical sea lion pose. And they certainly know how to sleep. A lot of them had sleeping going on. Then there's the Galapagos tortoise. You've heard about them. Largest tortoise, land tortoise in the world. There are other species, but these are probably the most famous. And he moves like a tortoise, very slow. It's interesting to get up close and personal with him. Quite the face. And he even talked to me for a while. He wasn't angry. He just was kind of saying, "Hey, I'm coming that way. Watch out." And it didn't matter where you were. You had to move because they were coming that way. That's just the way they are. And they certainly weren't afraid of you. Oh my. Did you wash your face before you came to Sabbath school this morning? And did some of you ladies have a mud bath? The great blue heron looks very much like ours here. It's a subspecies, but it's found there as well. And then there are 2 kinds of frigate birds. The great frigate bird, of which this is an example, and a great frigate bird chick. Yeah. What a proboscis they've got, and a beak. And when they get a little older, that big old beak that you just saw in the previous one, plus a head and neck, all kind of disappear into Mom's gullet to get lunch. I've often wondered how many of these bird species had to go to a local urgent care. But the Lord seems to create them with the ability to feed their young that way. No harm done. The green sea turtle. We had difficulty getting close to him. But notice the path up behind him. He goes way up above the tidal level, and or she does, and lays eggs, buries them, and then disappears back to sea, and the little ones are on their own. They ultimately hatch, and when they come out, they make a mad dash for the water before the gulls and other things catch them, because they're just little guys. And you can see where it gets its name. Here the shell almost appears green. Then land iguanas. This guy's about 4 feet long. And I looked at that and I said, the Lord created that too? Well, you know, the Bible talks about various species, but Ellen White tells us that there has been an amalgamation of species over time. In other words, we do see new species on the horizon, but iguanas are still iguanas. It's not iguanas and dogs. She also has some interesting things to say about what happened to some of the animals before the flood, the dinosaurs, etc., where they came from and why they're not here now. It wasn't all creatures. Sometimes you came across a rather beautiful plant. This is a lava cactus. And they grow in big, big clusters, and they can be quite striking. There's also a lava gull. He gets his name after that dark color, gray. And by the way, the lava gull is one of the rarest birds in the world. They believe there may be 400 pairs left in the world. And it's a quite striking bird, actually. There's also the lava heron. This isn't a very big heron. He's, at the outside, probably a foot tall, maybe, when he's standing like that. Then there's the magnificent frigate bird. Do you see that little reddish thing under his chin? That's his inflatable sac. He can inflate it at will and deflate it at will. It's primarily used to impress the ladies and maybe to show off a little bit with the other guys around. And when they fly, can you see the sheen on this one? That greenish sheen is typical of the magnificent frigate bird. And there's his inflatable sac. And by the way, I would judge that coloration to be pretty close to accurate. It's brilliant in the field. Marine iguanas. We sometimes are repulsed by these creatures. We look at them, we find them strange. But do you remember what did Satan appear as to Eve? A beautiful serpent. The Bible says that the serpent was confined to slithering on his belly. But I don't know what the original serpent looked like. I don't know what the original iguana looked like either. But I find them very interesting. He's looking at you. And they're actually quite friendly, actually quite harmless. They're largely vegetarian. Then there's the Nazca booby. Has an orange beak. She's preening. Orange eyes. I love it. I love the differentiation between creatures. That's a God who is creating with an eye toward color and toward variation, and he appreciated that. Here's a chick of a Nazca booby, and here's a little older one. And he had found a little something on the ground. I don't know exactly what it was, but it wasn't edible. And he walked around with that thing for the longest time, waiting for Mom to show up. And she finally came back and fed him. And that chick you just saw, fairly large, well, that's him with his head inside Mom's beak. And then there's the red-billed tropic bird. These are gorgeous. Twin tail feathers, you can only see one here, but twin tail feathers stick out behind and trail these birds. They're just really beautiful. And I happened to notice
I think I'm the only one with this shot because we were waiting on a beach, and I noticed up on the cliffside this tropic bird. She's got a nest there. They nest in crevices in the cliffs. And if you look very carefully, you can see the little one to the right of her in the back with his beak open. It's very faint. It was very dark in there. When they fly, they are most graceful, and they're fast. And to follow them and get one in a frame without chopping off tail or wings is a challenge. But when you manage it, they are a very beautiful bird. Red-footed booby. You thought you'd seen it all with the blue-footed and the Nazca. There's a third species with red feet. And I find, and they tend not to frequent the same area. The red-footed booby is much less common, only found on one or two of the islands, and a few blue-footed are found there as well. But the red-footed don't venture out beyond their favored islands for some reason. And so most of what you see are blue-footed boobies. But she was very cooperative. And then Solly Lightfoot crabs. Did the Lord create crabs? Somebody tried to tell me one time it couldn't be. But I think so. I think so. And I can only imagine they were more beautiful than these. Fascinating creatures. Here's looking at you. Those are its eyes up there that are out on the appendage, rather vulnerable. Striated heron, they're related to, and some think they're conspecific with the lava heron. But for many years they were separate in the bird books. He's not a large heron, he's a little guy, and he was fishing, hoping to find something, and he let me get quite close. And then there's a beautiful bird called the swallowtail gull, and you'll see how beautiful they can be. Red eye rings, orange, kind of reddish eye rings, red feet, beautiful coloration. I look at that through my camera lens and I wonder how people can buy this thing called evolution. You know, they'll say, well, but this creature and that creature and this other creature all have eyes. Well, good. Could it not be that the Lord said, I make things well? And these eyes have worked nicely for this creature, so I'll use eyes there too. I don't have a problem with that. And it doesn't suggest to me then that, you know, one creature with a little more sophisticated eye evolved from another creature with a less sophisticated eye. All I know is that this gal was beautiful. And notice you can barely see her other eye. She's got her head completely tilted, and her other eye's just under her beak there. A pair. And when they fly, they're equally beautiful. Then there's the waved albatross. A waved albatross. It gets its name from that wavy feathering. Kind of dark with the wavy appearance. It nests in the Galapagos. There are several species of albatross in the world. These albatross have a wingspan of about 7 feet. And this pair was doing a little courting. and certainly fun to watch them. And then when they flew, those wings, 7 feet from tip to tip, narrow, they just follow the air currents. Amazing flyers. Then the white-cheeked pintail, a little duck related to our pintails, but found only in the Galapagos. The subspecies is. There are white-cheeked pintails in some other parts of the world too. They were in the grass trying to hide. They were one of the few species that didn't want me getting very close, so I just kind of sat there and waited, and they made their way closer to me. And then the yellow-crowned night heron. We have yellow-crowned night herons here too. This is a subspecies of those. And then the yellow warbler. This is the female. We have yellow warblers right here in the summer in Bend. And they're a beautiful bird. The male, if you've seen one recently, looks something like that. And contrasted against the lava rock, it was fairly interesting coloration. Shout to the Lord, all the earth. Break out in praise. Sing for joy. Sing your praise to the Lord with the harp a melodious song, with trumpets and the sound of the ram's horn. Make a joyful symphony before the Lord the King. Let the sea and everything in it shout his praise. Let the earth and all living things join in. Let the rivers clap their hands in glee. Let the hills sing out their songs of joy before the Lord. And one day, we're going to see this creation remade. And after seeing the beauty there, in a rather ugly place, lava fields, cacti with thorns, after seeing the beauty there and the wonders of nature there, I can't wait to see the recreation. Can you imagine? Scientists are just beginning to scratch the surface of the true meaning of after their kind. And I'm confident that more and more the biblical record will be verified as we await the Lord's return. We need to proclaim Genesis 1 as truth. Truth worth knowing. Truth worth believing. And then one day, as recorded here in Isaiah, you will live in joy and peace. The mountains and hills will burst into song, and the trees of the field will clap their hands. I'm looking forward to that day. I can hardly wait to see what the Lord makes to repopulate the new earth after or according to their kind. We're going to sing in conclusion a song that we sang earlier, How Big is God? And I'm going to ask Jerry to hold this and just tap on that for each verse.